What's going on, everybody? My name is Johnny Bandon, and I'm your CCNA instructor for this CCNA video series. In this video, we're going to go over the Cisco iOS and the Cisco CLI. So wrapping up on our network fundamentals section, we're going to wrap this up by going into the actual Cisco devices, looking over the CLI, going over syntax, command structure, the context-sensitive help, the syntax-sensitive help, and then also a brief overview of just the iOS in general, which is a Cisco's operating system for network devices, right? So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So quick operating system overview, right? The computer I'm recording this video on right now is Windows 11. That's the operating system provided by Microsoft. The operating system for Cisco is iOS. And as you can see here, we have a couple different versions of iOS. This is the Nexus operating system for the Nexus solutions or hardware. And then we have regular iOS here, which is going to be the bulk of our study and practice in the CCNA. And then again, the Cisco iOS stands for Internet Network Operating System. It's just kind of the generic term, right? So if I had a 5K switch, like a Nexus OS switch, and I said, hey, what's the iOS on that switch? If you're working with a network administrator that doesn't like to play gotcha, he's going to understand what you're saying. It's really just kind of a generic term for any operating system dealing with Cisco networking devices. And again, this is found in the Flash. So then again, if we look at just a quick little diagram of the hardware and then the kernel and then the shell is what we call the command line interface that allows us to interact with the system to configure it. So the user can interact with the shell using a command line interface or graphical user interface known as a GUI. So for example, on my Windows machine here, this is the GUI. What you see is the desktop, right? I'm on Google Chrome presenting my Canva slides. So this is the GUI. If we open up, let's say, command prompt, we search right here, command prompt. Now we're into a CLI, right? And we can do some things from this CLI to interact with my system as well. So the way we interact in traditional networking with Cisco iOS, the Cisco operating system, is in the shell or the CLI. So when you're using the CLI, you're going to execute commands that, again, either provide textual output or configure the system. The advantages of a CLI over a GUI, especially for a device like a Cisco router, is that device, it's just there to route and patch traffic. You don't need a whole user experience, right? So why would we need a GUI just to configure features and technologies and protocols on a networking device, right? We can just use the CLI by typing in commands from a terminal emulator that allows us to CLI into the shell. So the disadvantage of a CLI is you do have to have a deeper knowledge of the underlying structure of that system, right? If you're just going to control a computer system via the command line. So now let's go over accessing the CLI. So there are several ways to access the CLI environment, get into that shell, and we're going to go over them. So the first thing you need to do is get something called a terminal emulation program, which we're going to go over in a few of the next few slides. And then once you have that terminal emulation program on your system, something like PuTTY or Secure CRT, you can physically, from the computer to the router or switch, console in. And in a few of our bonus videos, I'm going to show you guys this like real time. So this is an actual console port. You kind of see that this is actually what it looks like here. And then you can also remote in using these applications or these protocols, SSH or Telnet. And you begin an SSH or Telnet session also from what we call a terminal emulation program. Okay. So this console port says it provides out-of-band access. And what that means essentially is out-of-band means you're accessing a system not via means that aren't on the network. So I'm not typing in the IP address of the system and remotely managing it that way. I'm doing it outside of the network by physically consoling into it. So taking my blue Cisco console cable, plugging it into my computer, and then plugging that console, that rollover cable, into the actual Cisco firewall, router, or switch. Okay, so now we have a brief look at some of our terminal emulation programs that allow us to either console in, SSH into our devices. So as you can see here, we got PuTTY. This serial connection is what we'd click if we wanted to console in. And again, I will have a bonus video of me just consoling into a router, showing you real time what to do, what it looks like in a rack. We can choose SSH, and here it puts us at port 22 and then gives us an IP address of the device we want to SSH into. We do this in IT just in general, guys. Whether you're working on systems, servers, as you can see here, this secure CRT is doing a lot more than just getting into routers and switches. Is getting into what looks like mail servers, an Ubuntu client, Linux, or it could be anything. It's just an example. But we can SSH into systems to remotely manage them. So these terminal emulation programs allow us to control and configure via CLI. And typically when you're a network admin in a large enterprise, you're not going to use something like PuTTY to remotely manage thousands of devices if you're still doing traditional networking. You're going to want a more robust terminal emulation application or program, something like Secure CRT, where you can save sessions, open up tabs, you can globally save the username and password, and have you automatically log in with that global username and password. You can have buttons down here that'll let you paste in commands just by clicking that button. You can have multiple tabs that you can tab through. You can change the color scheme. There's just so much you can do with Secure CRT. And if you're a network admin engineer working on that campus or that enterprise, you're going to want something robust like Secure CRT. Again, it does cost, so I understand if some companies aren't willing to do that. So now let's get into the Cisco CLI modes. And I'm going to exit off here for a second. And I'm going to close this. I'm just going to go over what we're about to do, okay, guys? Because I'm going to jump back and forth between an actual CLI and the slides. So I'm going to go over this slide for one of the Cisco CLI modes, user exec mode. And then I'm going to bring in a Secure CRT session from one of my EVE-NG labs, okay, to show you what it actually looks like in a real CLI. So if you skipped my EVE-NG how-to videos, right now I have EVE-NG running on VMware Player, and I have this lab open, and I have set Secure CRT to my default application to use for telnet or consoling, and I'm going to open up, get into the shell of this router via CLI using Secure CRT. Here you can see my Secure CRT is pretty dry because this isn't my actual day job work computer. I just do this for labs and such, right? I'm going to make a whole video, a bonus video going over Secure CRT as well, and a couple of things you can do with it to make your life way easier. But for now, we're just going to bring this out of view, go back to our slides, and then bring it back in when we need to. Okay, so the first CLI mode I'm going to go over is user exec mode. So when you first access a shell of a router or switch or firewall, it's going to bring you into something called user exec mode. This is the very first mode of the Cisco CLI, and it's often referred to as a view-only mode, where from user exec mode, you can only run simple show commands, okay? And in this course, going to be the first time we access the CLI, and I've learned throughout the years, guys, is to just jump right into it, okay? When you're working in the CLI, I had a trainer one time tell me that everything you type into a Cisco CLI or command, you're telling that device what to do, okay? And you're going to hear me say this as we do configuration. So when I get into my router's user exec mode and I want to run show commands, because that's the only thing I can do, I can't do any configuration to that device, I'm telling it, show me this, okay? So again, user exec mode, just go over some of this information. It has limited capabilities, but it's useful just for simple show commands, basic operation. Another thing in here, it's at security level 0, and I'll go over what that means later on in this series. Again, only allows basic monitoring commands. I'll show you basic output. And then from this mode, you're going to use the enable command to get into privilege mode. So from user exec mode, you jump into privilege mode. And in privilege mode, you're at a level 15, right? That allows you to configure. So again, we'll get into that later. I think it's, again, been training for a long time. I think it's best just to say some things that may be ahead of your training, because it's like, almost through osmosis, you hear these terms, you hear this vernacular, and it just starts to settle in, right? So again, user exec mode is going to look, this is what the prompt looks like. You have your host name for the device and then a caret symbol, or like a right caret symbol. Okay, so now I'm consoled in to router 2 here, and look, I'm at enable mode. You can see the host name of my routers R2, and let's see what we can do here. So if I type in show and then question mark, this is going to show me all the show commands I can do. So let's say I want to look at the users on this device. I'm literally telling this router, hey, router, show users. And boom, this is going to show you all the users actively logged in. And the only thing logged in is me right here at the console connection. So I'm literally telling this router to do something. I'm telling this device, I'm in command, show me something. And if I got to figure out everything you can show me, I can use this question mark right here. So if I want to do show IP BGP, I can do that. And it's going to show me all these other commands I can add to it. Or I have this CR down here, which says, well, I don't know if that's actually what it means, but I always took it as correct, that this is a valid command. And it's show me output, right, via CLI, via this shell saying BGP is not active, brother. So what else can we do from user mode? Go into privilege mode. And let's go into what privilege mode is. So privilege exec mode, again, you must have elevated privileges to get into it if you have some access controls on your device, right? It allows you to get into the higher configuration modes like global config mode, where you can actually start configuring the device. From privilege mode, you also have all the show commands that you want, right? If you're at the full privilege mode. When we get into security, you'll understand what I mean by that. We can kind of set up almost like some role-based access models on our device, right? Or discretionary access models on our device where you're only allowed to do certain things. But anyways, so privilege mode. This is going to be the prompt. It's going to be a hashtag or the number symbol, right? For any of my older students. And from here, the user can use any monitoring commands, any show commands. And you can do some configuration from here. Like you can set the clock, right? Other things you can do from privilege mode for configuration. But the big thing about privilege mode is this is where we run all show commands from. And from this mode, we jump into global config mode, which guess what? Lets us configure the router or switch globally, right? It lets us make configurations that affect how it routes traffic or switches traffic at a global scale, okay? I love that they named it global config mode. Probably back in the 90s when there was like, or 80s, and there might have been, I don't know, 50 routers. They're like, if you change something on this router, the whole internet's affected. And they probably just kept it. That's my headcanon for that. So what can we do from privilege mode? Well, let's do some question mark, right? Some context sensitive help or command sensitive help. We can see everything that we can do here. So like I was telling you, we can like SSH from here to a device. So TACL means login using this username. So user test and then an IP address. So from privilege mode, we can SSH somewhere. From privilege mode, we can run a lot of show commands. We can actually run our show running config to show us our running configuration. And I'm pressing the space bar. Looks like I had some things configured here too. That's good. I remember to save. And again, Remember, guys, this question mark is going to be our best friend as we're learning. And if you see me type in run and then you see the command automatically complete, no, I'm not a magician. It's not magic. I'm hitting the tab key. Cisco iOS lets you hit the tab key if that command is filled out enough to be the only selection. So what I mean by that, when I type in RUN, the only thing that can come after that is the full command running config. If I just type in RU and I hit tab, it's not letting me complete any command because I could have two options. RUD PV1, which I have no idea what that is. But when I put that in, tab complete. Boom. Something else we can do from here. Well, we can be a little bit more specific too, right? Show running config AAA. We can see the AAA, which we're going to learn about later. We can show the VRFs, which we're also going to learn about later. So a lot of different things you can do to get output and check the configuration. And then one of the most important things about privilege mode, we can get into global config mode. And now we can start making changes and configuration on our device. Let me bring this out of view. Okay, so another quick overview of the CLI modes. From user exec, we go to privilege. From privilege, we go to global. And then from global, we go into specific configuration modes. What do we mean by that? Well, if we're configuring named access lists, interfaces, your VTY lines, routing protocols, class maps, policy maps, QoS, if we're configuring anything that needs specific configuration that isn't just going to affect the router like, generating RSA keys or a host name, we don't need specific configuration. Then from global config mode, we go into that specific or sub configuration. Okay. So let's go over that. And let me check to make sure I'm not getting ahead of my slides. Kind of am. So again, let's check out these slides before I show you on the actual CLI. So if you bring this full circle, we know this caret means you're in user exec mode. You type in enable and enter to bring you into privilege exec mode, which is the hashtag. From here, again, run all your monitoring commands. You can telnet an SSH from here. You can set the clock. You can do a lot of things from there that help you manage and to configure some things. But the most important things about privilege mode, we run all of our show commands. And from privilege mode, we type in the command configure terminal because we're about to do some configuration to get into global config mode. And then from global config mode, which looks like this prompt, config and then hashtag, we can go into sub-configuration mode to start doing actual configuration on our interface, our routing protocols, features on our router, right? So with this command interface Ethernet 00, I enter into that interface's configuration mode, otherwise known as sub-configuration mode. To get out of it, I can type in the command exit. Exit brings me down a layer, right? Brings me down a level. Now I've exited from sub-configuration mode into global config mode. And then here I'm going to configure our VTY lines, which allows the remote management of our device. It's those lines that actually process the remote sessions, right? And there I enter sub-configuration mode for our VTY lines, line configuration mode. So awesome, guys. And it's really that simple. I mean, if you can just think about what these modes mean, right? Privilege mode means you're privileged enough. You have the authorization and the access to do show commands. And you have the authorization and the access to jump into global configuration mode. And then, I mean, what's the command to get into global configuration mode? Configure terminal. Once you're in this mode, start configuring, right? Let's do something. Let's do some configuration. Interface, Ethernet, 00. Boom, I'm in there. What can we do from here now? Well, a whole lot. I want to do an IP address. I'm telling this router, hey, interface 00. That sucker needs an IP address. So my command is interface Ethernet 00. And then I'm telling that interface what IP address it's going to use. You're telling this router what to do, and it's going to listen. As long as you're telling it the right way and it makes it happy, it's going to listen. Again, this video is about not necessarily the commands and what they're doing. It's about the modes. So we'll go over what all this means, guys. Don't worry. Okay, let's go over the iOS command structure. So kind of right here, right, we have our prompt. We have the command. We always have a space in between our commands. And then we have the keyword or argument. Okay, so our keyword or argument here is IP protocols. And the command is show. Kind of a nice little chart. When you start really diving into your career, you kind of forget about these things, right? That there's an actual command structure where it's command and keyword because you're just getting so used to syntax and configuration. But it's good to learn. And let's go over the help features. So context-sensitive help is going to help us figure out how to what's the correct completion of that command or what's coming directly after a letter. The command syntax is showing us what keyword or argument comes after that command, okay? And we use a question mark for all this. So enter a question mark to see which commands start with specific characters or a group of characters. Enter a question mark after a space to see which arguments and keywords are available to particular commands. Pretty self-explanatory, I think, right? We do a question mark without the space. It lets us see if that's even a correct command I'm trying to type in, or what's the completion of it, or what is available from those letters. You put the space, this lets you see what comes after that command, what keywords or arguments. Again, then command syntax, right? Kind of already went over that. And look at this chart. Let's go over this. So I'm going to bring this into view. And let's go over these hotkeys because these are lifesavers. So I'm going to start from privilege mode. And let's go over the first one, tab. This completes a partial command name entry. So if I type in con, ain't working. Because I got two options here. But if I type in that F, where I only have one option, and I hit tab, boom, that's going to complete the command. I believe the tab key is very useful when starting out. Because if you're not sure and you're plugging away, if you just are getting used to hitting the tab key, you know if your command is good or not, okay? And then, okay, the backspace, it erases things. Control D erases the character at the cursor. So let's say I type in interface, and I put in an extra R there, and I get this invalid input, and it tells me right here, like, oh, hey, you fucked that one up. Well, if I come over here and hit Control D, it gets rid of what I'm hovering over. Why is this important? Because right now you see my cursor's on the F key. If I hit backspace, what do you think it's going to delete? That R or that F? That R. So Control D is kind of a quick way to just be like, I need to get rid of that. Boom. Okay. Control K erases all characters from the cursor to the end of the command line. So let's say IP address 192 and I fuck it all up, right? Oh, excuse me, I mess it all up. I'm like, let me erase all that. Done. Get it out of here. And then escape D. I hit escape D. It gets rid of everything in that word, just that word, okay, from where the cursor's at. Okay, then the enter key. So let's say I exit back out to privilege mode. I type in show running config. That enter key is just going to go one line at a time in output. If I hit the space bar, that's going to show me the next however many lines you have configured, 10, 24. And then if we're on that show running config, any key I type that isn't the space bar or enter key is going to back me out to my mode. Okay, then we got break keys. So let's say I go to global config mode and I enter sub-configuration mode for Ethernet 00. If I hit Control C, it backs me all the way out to privilege mode. If I go back into there, ETH00, I hit Control Z, it also backs me out to privileged exec mode. Okay? Another one, let's say I type in a command access class 120 standard permit, right? It says invalid input. Well, actually, let's say I want to make this, I'm missing a command at the very beginning. How can I go back to the very beginning of this without deleting everything or just taking forever to move my cursor over? I can hit Control A, which brings me to the very front of the prompt. Now, let's say I got to go back to the back of it, Control E, another good one. Let's say I need to repeat a command I did. Let's say I need to repeat a command that I inputted like 10 commands back. If I hit this up arrow, it lets me scroll through all the commands that I've done from that mode. In this mode, we're in global config. Up arrow, and then the down arrow lets you scroll through all the previous commands. This is also one of the most used things, right? Because you're doing configuration and having to go back and use the same commands over and over. Just space key, boom, if you need to know a command out. So that's another thing, right? If I need to know this access list, I can up arrow, Control A, right? So it's Control E to the front. I can up arrow, Control A, then boom, right? Let's go over this Control Shift 6. So let's say my router does a DNS lookup for this, and it's taking forever, and I can't escape it. If I hit Control Shift 6, it aborts that DNS lookup, and it's supposed to. In some iOSs, I've noticed that it's kind of a pain. It really doesn't. But it's supposed to abort anything that's pretty much stalling your device. All right. Awesome, guys. I hope we've learned something about the iOS and CLI. Join us for our next video, which will be the last of our first section, minus the bonus videos I'll be adding on. And we're going to get into some baseline commands. So thank you for viewing.